So it's a huge weekend in the Allianz Football Leagues, and no doubt about the big game, a repeat of last year's All-Ireland football final. Mayo against Dublin down at McHale Park in Castlebar at 7 o'clock on Saturday evening. Billy Joe Padden is on the line. Evening, Billy Joe.
Good evening, lads.
Very surprised to see the spread for this game was only 4 points, considering the amount of players that Mayo are missing. Their entire full-back line, Brendan Harrison, Chris Barrett, Keith Higgins. They're missing Lee Keegan. They're missing their midfield from last year's All-Ireland final in Tom Parsons and Seamus O'Shea. And they're also missing Cillian O'Connor and Donny Vaughan as well. And Paddy Durcan, who's probably been their player of the league so far. This game probably couldn't be coming at a worse time for Mayo.
Yeah, definitely. I think when you consider all the absentees you name, and even to add like Donny Vaughan and Chris Barrett to that, and particularly when you see the strength of this Mayo team has been that half-back line and how they've been able to drive out of that area. And when you've taken Tom Parsons, Seamus O'Shea, all those half-backs out of it, you know, Mayo just do not have that same pace and power that they would have. I suppose in terms of the spread at 4 points, the year before last, I think Mayo had a very poor performance against Cork in the first round of the league, and then went up to McHale Park in bad conditions and soft ground, and it was a real grind against Dublin. They only lost by a point, and I think maybe that will be the template for Stephen Rochford going into this game, to keep it very tight at the back. They haven't been scoring well up front anyway, so that's not going to dramatically turn around in one game. So Mayo, to keep this game competitive and to have a chance of winning, are going to have to keep the score down, and I think that's the only option. So I think they'll see loads of men behind the ball, and Mayo will hopefully try and counter-attack and do a bit better defensively and around the middle of the field.
Stephen Rochford's in an incredibly difficult position during this league campaign, in that expectations around Mayo are just off the scale, despite the fact at the start of the year it seemed that everyone was quite comfortable with giving some of the more senior players a rest. Now it feels as though they're on the verge of crisis, and in this he's trying to find a couple of gems, a couple of players to emerge during the league that he can take with him to the championship. Is that all the harder to do when you are missing so many experienced players? Because ideally, I guess you'd have a core of 10, 11 experienced players there, and then you're taking a few risks around them and see who shines.
Well, if you're a young player coming into a squad like that, it's so much easier to perform if you're coming into a team and there's 13 established players there and there's maybe 2 young guys in there. But like when it's the way it's happening is that half the team is inexperienced. They're not used to playing together. They haven't a lot of football under their belt already this year. And then, to be honest, they just haven't been good enough. Really, and some of those players that have got a chance, the auditions that they've had, they've been found wanting. And that's probably as much as anything else that's frustrating Mayo supporters, is that nobody has really stepped up and put their hand up and says, I can contribute, I can come in here and take a place for some of the big games that are going to come along in the championship. And that's the thing that's frustrating the Mayo supporters the most, I think, because you're left in a situation where you're just reliant on Lee Keegan and Aidan O'Shea and Cillian O'Connor and all these players we've already mentioned.
So much of what Mayo have achieved over the last 6-7 years has been built around that brilliance of that half-back line and the explosiveness of Lee Keegan, of Colin Boyle, over the last couple of seasons of Paddy Durcan, of Donny Vaughan when he stepped in there. With those players not available by and large for this campaign, has Rochford been trying anything else? Is there any sign of a change with tactics with Mayo?
Well, not really. In a couple of the games, particularly the Kerry game and even again against Galway, even though the Galway's game plan was very obvious from the early stages of that game, they were going to get everyone behind the ball and play counter-attack, and they did that very well. Against Kerry, which was a 15-on-15 game, I felt that Mayo just had too many bodies high up the field, and it left too much space for the Kerry attackers to do damage, and they did that. They were by far the sharpest unit on the field that day. And really what I think Mayo would have been better served and taken more from the template that they had in the latter stages of the championship last year and the year before, where they played an extra defender, got loads of bodies back, and then tried to create that running game, particularly through the middle third, and then maybe a little dink pass into somebody playing the full forward line. It was Andy Moore and Cillian in the summer. In the league, maybe Jason Doherty played full forward in one of those games and looked sharp in the Kerry game in the early stage, but just was starved of possession. And I think that's what Mayo probably should have done in those 2 games, and I think that's probably what they will do on Saturday, and be more defensive, 12, 13 fellas behind the ball. When they win the ball back, try and hold on to it, because if you just get into a game against Dublin where there's constant turnovers, they're just going to cut you to shreds on those quick transitions.
It really doesn't seem as though they have much choice against Dublin on Saturday, because Dublin have just continued the way they've been for the last few seasons at the start of this campaign. They've already used 16 of the 21 players that played in last year's All-Ireland final. This weekend, they could have Diarmuid Connolly back for the first time this season, Paul Flynn and Cormac Costello returning as well. It's quite frightening for everybody else. From what you've seen, though, of Dublin in their opening games, what's Jim Gavin trying to learn? What are the areas that he's been really focusing on?
I think that they have been working on their own kick-out. The kick-out will change because of the new rule. I think that Cluxton is obviously, is better equipped than any of the goalkeepers to deal with that, and I think they've gone long more than maybe they would have in odd years because they're going to be forced to do that against teams that put pressure on them. And I think that's why Michael Darragh-McCauley has started the games, because he's been a factor in the first 50 minutes of games, being a big target in the middle of the field there. I think also at the same time they've tried to put pressure on the opposition in kickouts, but it's pretty much more of the same. And probably the most impressive thing for him has been the way that some of the Basquel and Howard have just come into the team and just fitted in seamlessly, and you just felt that they've been there all the time. And I think you got to give Jim Gavin credit for that, in that it seems so easy for a player to come in and just fit into this Dublin team, and it's obvious that their coaching and their preparation in terms of their training is really beneficial for them in that regard. So
if Jim Gavin is thinking that teams are going to pressure them now on the kickouts and they're going to have to go long more often, and McCauley suddenly becomes a player that he needs in and around the middle of the pitch, you can't drop James McCarthy or Brian Fenton. So who comes out? Where is the change?
What they have done in the league games, and what even the All-Ireland final last year, I think if you get McCauley on to do his 50 minutes or 55 minutes, if that's the game plan, well then you bring on another defender, or you bring on a forward and move Kieran Kelly back to the half-back line, and you put James McCarthy in midfield. And James McCarthy is so dangerous in those last 15 minutes of games where he's driving through the middle, because he has that, he's a supreme athlete, and times his runs to perfection. So I think that's the kind of the way he manages the game, is that it'll be Fenton and McCauley, and then if he needs to make a change with McCauley, then James McCarthy will pop into midfield and take that role then for the last 15 minutes of game and see it out as a closer as such.
It does feel like a weekend where it is going to be a division of the division, almost in Division 1, that we'll see some teams really now pushing on to try and force their way into a final, whereas we'll end up with 4 or 5 teams who are going to spend the next few weeks battling for survival. And Monaghan-Tyrone is one of those games that could see the two go either way. I want to ask you about Monaghan and what they've been starting to achieve. They were beaten by Mayo first day out by a single point in Clonus, but they've since gone on to beat Kildare by a point in Newbridge, Kerry by 2 points in Inniskeen, and just the level they've been able to get to, considering that they are the 4th smallest county by population. They have, I think it's 25 of their players based in Dublin, and just what Malik O'Rourke has been over to see over the last few years to get them to a level where maybe they're not quite at that upper tier just yet, but they're pushing.
Yeah, look, they're definitely overperforming in terms of population, and there's counties close to them that just aren't coming close to which would have counties that would have a much larger population base. So you've got to give them credit in that regard to all their clubs in terms of the caliber of player they're producing, and then Malik O'Rourke in terms of the job he's doing. Because I think they are extremely consistent at this time of year. Their league campaigns have been really good. Their Ulster Championships over the last number of years have been good for the most part. They've won a couple of titles. The area where they still need to improve is when they get to Croke Park, and their record has been abysmal there. And I think in the past, maybe they've suffered because they've had to use the same 15, 16 players and have totally relied on them. And the Ulster Championship is so attritional that then they come to Croke Park and there isn't a whole lot left. But I think they're trying to change. I think Malik O'Rourke has the right idea, and you think of the players like Carl O'Connell and Conor McCarthy, McCarron and McManus up front. But in that middle third, he's trying to get more athletic. He's trying to put more athletic players in there that can transition the ball through that area when you get into the wide open spaces in Croke Park, that you can run with the likes of Dublin or the likes of Mayo or Kerry when you get there, because those teams are built to run on the hard surface in Croke Park, and that's an area where Monaghan haven't been up to it. But I think they're on the right track in terms of preparing themselves for that challenge in the summer.
Can you learn about that in the league? Do you get a good sense of the players who would be suited to Croke Park during the summer at this time of the year?
It's hard to learn, but I suppose the one thing you can see is that if you keep putting out there those young athletic players, and you prepare 25 or 26 for the summer, then your squad is going to be stronger and you have those options. And even if it is a case that, Desi Moen doesn't start a game, he has experience to come on and play the last 15 minutes or whoever it is, or even with the 3 inside forwards to have, maybe you leave Jack McCarron to come on for the last 25 minutes and be that impact sub because he's such a good outside shot. And I think it's just a case of that you get each of those players more familiar with playing with each other. And then you won't really know until you play in Croke Park as to how they'll react. But at least you can call on 22, 23 lads that can do a job for you, as opposed to where maybe 3 or 4 years ago, Monaghan were totally reliant on the 15 or 16.
Yeah, and you're trying to build a base as well, I guess, where you can get the very best out of Conor McManus, and he doesn't have to take all the pressure himself. And by the sounds of it, with McCarron, who's been getting better and better over the last couple of seasons, and in particular the emergence of Conor McCarthy, who was just exceptional in the Sigerson Cup final last weekend, it does look as though maybe the weight on the shoulders of Conor McManus won't be quite as severe as it's been over the last 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's going to make it a lot easier for him. And particularly with the way football is played now also, is that it's very hard if you're an inside forward and you're the main go-to guy, that you're going to have 3 defenders around you. And even if you win the ball, you're out on the sideline, you're in a corner. And unless you're on a really good day, and we have seen Conor McManus on those days where it seems like no matter where he's been on the pitch and he's kicked it, it's gone over the bar. But if Monaghan are to be successful, and any team, they really need points from other areas of the field, and that's half-backs coming up getting scores, midfielders, and the 3 forwards that we've mentioned being all chipping in. And I think that if anything we've learned from Dublin's success, and even to an extent Mayo's success in the last stages of the championship, you have to be able to get points from all over the field.
Just before we let you go, I know you were looking at the early games and maybe some of the scraps that have been started, particularly the one between Mayo and Galway, but the benefits to certain teams of starting this Malaise or Schmozzles or whatever the official title is for them at the moment, of taking the momentum out of the opposition, it's actually quite a useful mechanism if you use it right.
Yeah, well, if you consider, like, I suppose there was a lot made of the Mayo-Galway one. If you consider the circumstances of that game, Galway were winning quite comfortably. They just really wanted to take time off the clock. They wanted to ensure that Mayo didn't get a goal and kind of generate momentum off that. So it played right into their hands. So I don't think it was ever a case that it was just hot-headedness or aggression. I think there was a tactical element to that as well. And the thing that frustrates me about those things is that it all wouldn't have developed if the referee had just given the free to Aidan O'Shea in on the 14-yard line as he was knocked over or obstructed and making a run for the ball. And it's a free and it's the kick out and you go on again. But no, it's let develop and there's more and more made of it. And to me, that's the most frustrating thing about Gaelic football at the minute, is the way it's been officiated. And even if you think back to the way Mullins got sent off for Donegal against Kerry, where he kicked out and he rightly got a red card. But there was no punishment for the start of that, which was the Kerry player holding on to him in the middle of the field, and of course he reacts. So there's no disincentive for a fella to make that initial contact, and to me that's the thing that frustrates me the most about football. And
it's a win-win for the tackler, for the person who gives away the foul.
Exactly, he gets the marker to react. He gets sent off, and at the same time, particularly in the Galway case, he slows up the game and loses whatever momentum Mayo had, which wasn't much because they weren't playing very well. And this is not, I suppose, it's not a Galway bashing thing. If Mayo were in that exact same situation, I'd expect them to do the exact same thing.
Yeah, all right. Great stuff as always, Billy Joe.
Hey, hope you enjoyed that latest offering from Off the Ball. If you want to subscribe, and you should, check out just up here. All our latest stuff is just down here. Generally, knock yourself out.